Hello, everyone. Welcome back to How It Could Have Been a Masterpiece, where I dissect each and every single one of the Thomas specials in order, in extreme depth and detail. And then, at the end, I explain how it could have been improved and how it could have been, well, a masterpiece. Or how it was, if it was, in fact, a masterpiece. I am so sorry that this one took so long to come out, guys, but trust me, it's worth it. I poured my heart and soul into this one. This one's going to be a lot of fun because now we are finally into the initially mixed but eventually wonderful world of Thomas and CGI, starting with the first full CGI production, Hero of the Rails. Now, like The Great Discovery, I have a soft spot for this one. When it first came out, I thought it was the coolest thing ever and was so excited to see Thomas in CGI, as now all the characters had their own individual voices. Yeah, even as a kid I knew it wouldn't be the same, but I was excited nonetheless. And it was, at the time, really good. But unfortunately, of course, was followed by Season 13, which, although I tried to be optimistic and enjoyed it slightly at the time, Stockholm Syndrome much. It was very disappointing, and it was the beginning of one of the worst, if not the worst era in Thomas history. But that is a topic for another video. For now, I'll say this. Miller continued the Flanderization of the characters from the hit era, and it only got worse. In the Miller era, by default, all the characters are idiots and one-dimensional. Thomas is curious and childish, Percy is like a baby, Henry worries and is afraid of everything, and frankly, so is Toby. Gordon is grumpy, James is an ass, and Edward is somewhat wise but also mostly pathetic. Does any of that sound right to you? No! In each episode, a character makes a mistake 3 times. Topham scolds them, and they make it right, and are really useful engines, blah blah blah. It's all so boring. The engines hardly do regular jobs, the narrator talks too much, the animation can look dull, but decent, the dialogue is childish and depthless, some of the original UK voices and even some of the US voices are annoying. Personally, I like the US dub more, but over time I came to love the UK dub a lot in the Brenner era, like how I came to love Michelangelo's narration recently, and the music is surprisingly good, and so were the toys and marketing, but otherwise, yeah, one of the worst eras of Thomas. And of course, when Brenner took over, this all changed, but we'll get to that later. Over the years, the Miller era got worse and worse, and we all realized and knew this, but even when the Brenner era came along, through it all, I maintained a soft spot for this film and Blue Mountain Mystery. Do they still hold up today? Well, let's find out. And just like before, as always, I'll be breaking apart every single little detail in this film and discuss how I feel about it. So let's go, guys. Plot summary and background. Summer arrives once more on the island of Sodor, but when Spencer returns to the island to help build a summer house for the Duke and Duchess, he begins to constantly harass, tease, and bully the other engines. When Thomas has had enough and stands up to Spencer, he is challenged to a race to see who's the better engine. Although Thomas tries his hardest in the competition, his brakes fail and he becomes a runaway, eventually coming to rest on an abandoned part of the line. There he meets Hero, a mysterious but kind old engine from the old days of Sodor. After hearing his story, Thomas promises his new friend that he will help restore him, but Spencer is crawling around every turn and won't let Thomas out of his sight, desperate to uncover his secret and stop him. Can Thomas save Hero before it's too late? You find out in this movie. So I already mentioned most of the background about CGI, but I'll go over the other major stuff. The CGI era was animated by Nitrogen Studios, who later did Sausage Party. Crazy, right? And narrators Michelangelos and Michael Brandon returned after Brosnan was dropped, but now every character got their own individual voices, which differed in each dub, and composer Robert Hartshorn stayed on. Like Season 12, this film was initially planned to be a CGI model hybrid, but this plan was dropped in favor of going all-out CGI like most other kids' programs at the times. Now, lore and series-wise, this film sets up a lot. We get newcomer Hero, whose backstory adds a lot to Thomas' lore, and contradicts a lot of it too, but we'll get to that. And the Steamworks, the infamous place where all engines, mostly steam engines, go to be repaired, where Victor and Kevin reside. Pleasant continues building and utilizing the already established main cast of the Steam Team, all of which become staples of CGI Thomas. For what it's worth, this film sets up the world of CGI Thomas pretty damn well. But there's still plenty more to talk about as this series goes on, but for now, I think that about covers it. As always, the music is great, and there's a lot of great musical themes throughout the movie. That goes without saying. With all that out of the way, let's get into the movie. The film opens with this very cute little animated opening title sequence, which will become a norm for most of the movies going forward. It's just a nice little segment that introduces us to the movie, and it's cute, like I said. I like it. Sure, the film could have just opened on its own, and it still does after this, so I don't mind it. Sure, I do love when they ditch it in The Adventure Begins, Soldier's Legend of the Lost Treasure, and Great Race, and have a typical cinematic opening, but I'll always have nostalgia for these little animated sequences that precede the film. And now we're officially on Sodor in CGI, and it looks great. Obviously, Ark's animation is much better, but I'll always have nostalgia for Nitrogen Chew. It looks nice, despite being a little dull at times. Sodor in CGI looks pretty good. It doesn't hold a candle to the classic series, not yet anyway. It does later, in my opinion. We get some nice little exposition to open up the movie from the narrator, but not too much, so it's alright. We meet Thomas, who's pleasantly waiting at a water tower when a streak of silver races by, scaring both him and his crew. And now, we finally hear the long-anticipated voices of each of our main characters, and they're okay. I'll talk about them in both dubs for the sake of this video. Some of them work for me, some don't. Thomas and Percy's US voices work, despite there being some really odd or lackluster line deliveries at times, but Percy and Thomas's voices in the UK are just damn grating in this area. I mean, seriously, they're just awful. They do get better in the Brenner era. Trust me, I do end up liking Ben Small's Thomas. Henry's US voice is just too weird and he sounds too feminine. It's just not Henry. But his UK voice is pretty good. I mostly like Edward's US voice and his UK voice. But after this, I dare say I prefer his UK voice. I love James's US voice, but his UK voice is pretty good too. But both get better with time like most of these. And I do end up loving Rob Ragshaw a lot. Toby's UK voices have always been good, but his US voice only ever conveys the worried part of his personality. And for that, I don't like it that much. Both of Gordon's are great, but I'll always prefer his strong US voice. And both of Emily's are great too. Okay, that was a lot. Anyway, this film opens nicely, and it's very cinematic and exciting to hear them all for the first time, especially in this exciting scene where a mysterious engine zooms by, giving everyone a scare. Of course, if you look, you'll know who it is. But yeah, this scene does its job well, and sets up the movie. In the next scene, we join the engines as they discuss the mysterious engine, only to be interrupted by the engine himself, Spencer, who is the titular antagonist of this movie. And what do I think of him? I like Spencer a lot. He's a great character. It's awesome that Gordon has a grizzly cousin to bounce off of, and considering he's an A1, or A0, or whatever, and Spencer's an A4, it makes sense that the two most iconic express locomotives in Britain have a rivalry. He's cocky, self-absorbed, entitled, and careless, more so than any other engine, and looks down upon the Sodor engines, but more often than not gets shown up by them, and it's always satisfying to see. So it makes sense for him to be a villain, and personally, I think it's awesome they made a steam engine the main villain of a film for once. It's fresh, and was kind of revolutionary for the series at the time, and I appreciate that so much. We'll talk about his role and portrayal as the film goes on, but for now, that's my piece. He's awesome, and he works. He's a hateable asshole in the best way possible. It's revealed that he's staying for the whole summer to help build the summer house for the Duke and Duchess, which he of course brags about, much to the engine's dismay, setting up his role in the film. Another thing, I like that this film is a steam team story. Already at the beginning, we see them coming together to talk about things, and I love it a lot. This is the perfect story to be an ensemble where all the main engines come together, and it's so satisfying. Also, yes, we already see how bad Miller screwed up Henry in one line. He was very, very fast! We then follow the engines doing their work, only to be disturbed and harassed by Spencer, continuing to build upon him being the clear main villain of this film, as he's just the biggest asshole. He even tells Toby he's too old to be useful. Prick. Good. But yeah, this scene does its job, sets up how the engine's tolerance of Spencer will begin to fade away after the constant bullying, setting up Thomas's brave move to stand up against a big bully. That night, the engines complain about Spencer, continuing the use of the main cast collectively. Nice. They're all starting to have enough with Spencer's bullshit, and we're building up to the big moment where Thomas gives him what for. And this upsets Thomas the most, as he's kind of the leader of the steam team, the youngest and one of the kindest and most innocent. Yeah, Gordon or Edward are the leader too, but I mean, come on, it's Thomas, so it makes sense for it to be him. Unlike in episodes, Thomas usually works in the Miller-era movies, well, aside from Misty Island Rescue and Day of the Diesels, in which he's a selfish, racist bigot in both, and he's portrayed as a mixture between a little cocky and cheeky with kind, determined, and smart. That's the mature Thomas I know and love. As you'll come to see, I love a mature, balanced Thomas, and that's on full display here, but we'll get into that as the movie progresses. Also, Spencer's scary. What? What does that even mean? Why? Ugh, whatever. Alright, might as well talk about it now. The dialogue in this film is basic and at times kinda dumb. much like the Miller era episodes where most of the dialogue is genuinely dumb and talks down to kids. At least the story and character work here are great, but yeah, this is just a perfect example of the often ridiculous and oversimplified dialogue of this film, which started in the hit era and it's still present here. It was fine in The Great Discovery, as I think the dialogue was great there personally, and it's okay here. The script has its moments, but overall, it's the story and characters that shine. Moving on. In the next scene, we see Thomas working at the docks with his friends when Spencer arrives, only to harass them even more, going as far to call Thomas a toy train. What an asshole! This causes all the engines to snap at Spencer, and I friggin' love it. Everyone quickly comes to Thomas's defense, even Gordon and James, who love teasing the little engines. This just continues to make it clear to me how much of a family these guys are, and how they always look out for each other, and I love that so much. No matter how hasty and bitter and rude they can all be at times, well, except Edward, he's always nice. They all do care about and love one another, and I'll always love that. This film isn't just about Thomas himself, it's a movie about a family coming together to help someone in need, and I love that about it so much. But yeah, this scene is great. As I said, Thomas defends himself after Spencer says he's incapable of pulling heavy loads, and his friends, his family, jump to his defense. I'll admit Thomas gets a little cocky here, and so do his friends, saying he can pull equally to, if not more than Spencer, when that's obviously not true. But this movie isn't realistic at all, so it's fine. Don't worry about it. I perceived it as a bit metaphorical. But either way, he doesn't deserve to be teased like that. No one does. Spencer isn't intimidated and smugly challenges Thomas to a contest of strength to prove who's the superior engine, with them each taking heavy loads as far as they can around the island. In an act of bravery and determination to defend his friends, Thomas impulsively accepts, much to his friends' horror and worry. Which again, I love how much they care, as they know Thomas can't beat Spencer, but will back him up to the end. I like to believe Gordon would have tried stepping up to take Thomas's place, saying a line like, "He's just a little tank engine, Spencer, it's not fair. Race me instead. I'll make you wish you never came to Sodor." And Spencer smugly declares, No, I'll only race Thomas. He was the one who spoke up. Plus, we know who win between us anyway, don't we, Gordon? Setting up their race later. But he still defends Thomas. Thomas begins to have second thoughts as he realizes the reality of the situation, but Percy jumps to encourage him, assuring he'll show Spencer how special and damn hardworking Sodor engines are, and that they're far better than he'll ever be, and it's very nice and cute. Thomas's confidence is restored, and he declares he'll show Spencer a thing or two. Great scene. Also, I just realized how damn well this film was directed. There's so many low angles that just perfectly portray the power, size, and might of steam engines, and in that regard, yeah, it pays a little homage to the classic series and how well it conveys the majesty and marvelous strength of locomotives. David Mint would be proud of that part at least, plus the story and character work in my opinion. The next morning, the engines await Spencer at the shunting yards to begin the competition, and as Spencer arrives and attempts to intimidate, Thomas begins to have second thoughts, once more. But Percy once again assures him, his best friend, that, like Thomas always tells them, he can do anything he wants to, and it's awesome, again continuing to indicate how mature and leader-like Thomas can be. He may never be as wise as Edward or as big as Gordon, but he's Thomas the fucking tank engine. He'll do anything for his friends, his family, for his home, and so he decides to give it a god-honest try. But as another nice detail, maybe Edward even tries talking Thomas out of it, but to no avail. Thomas and Spencer are coupled to their heavy loads, and Edward gives them instructions on how the race will work. Love that it's Edward, by the way. But maybe he does it reluctantly and says, "Oh, this is ridiculous and unsafe, but here goes nothing." Or maybe he says he'll have no part in it and Gordon has to do it. That makes more sense. And so the contest begins, with Thomas holding on to hope. Thomas's friends worry for him, but whistle him good luck all the same. The race gets off to a rough start, as Spencer obviously pulls ahead, and Thomas desperately tries to keep up. His effort is admirable, but of course he can't beat Spencer at this. He's only a small tank engine compared to big ol' Spencer. But it's still very entertaining to see Thomas try his hardest, and we're all rooting for him. It just sucks to see Spencer getting away with this bullshit and being an asshole. There's no way he'll ever shut up about this. I love how the race is shot, by the way. It just looks great and keeps up the suspense. Good. However, after Thomas overcomes a steep slope, his brakes fail and he becomes a runaway, which jumpstarts an unwanted roller coaster ride as he races past the cocky Spencer waiting at the junction, much to both of their surprises. This action scene is pretty good if only the narrators would shut the fuck up! I mean, seriously, every time I watch this movie, the narrator gets more and more annoying, especially after Tug pointed out how bad it is in his video, and by God is it bad! every other line the narrator says something, and it's so annoying and disrupts the scene. Like Tug said, they have their own voices. Let them do the talking. So yeah, that's a constant problem in this film, because without so much narration, this film would be so much better and flow far more naturally and smoothly. Anyway, Thomas's roller coaster comes to an end as he comes to an old abandoned part of the line and crashes through some bushes. After taking a few seconds to rest, he hears a faint voice, scaring him. But curious, he inches closer to where he heard it and is met with the surprise of his life. There, in the middle of the woods, lie an old, dilapidated, and abandoned steam engine. Thomas is afraid at first, but the old engine smiles gently, also fearfully at him. Makes a comment about his brakes failing. The narrator says everything here, so it takes away all the subtlety of Thomas's fear and then comfort when the engine smiles at him. Screw the narrator, man, because this scene is really nice. Thomas remains reluctant but curious, and after a minute decides to open up and introduces himself politely. The engine introduces himself as Hiro, and Thomas is left with countless questions, all of which Hiro tries to answer. Hiro replies that he's been here for decades and came from Japan a long time ago and was sent to work on Sodor. It was apparently one of the first steam engines on Sodor. Okay, let's get this out of the way. That's bullshit. Okay? It's bullshit. If you ask me, in the TV series, Edward was the first standard gauge engine on Sodor, or the S&M engines, whichever. Now, Hiro could have come not long after that and either worked on the main line before Thomas arrived, or worked on one of the branch lines until it closed down, like the Peel Godred, which is why Thomas doesn't know who he is. Look, I love Hiro. He's a great character. He's observant, gentle, kind. He's quieter than Edward, less temperamental than Toby. He's very different from both. He's not like top tier or anything for me, but he's up there, and I do love him a lot, and his backstory of being from Japan and being known as Master of the Railway is very cool. And having been on Sodor a long time is all great, but just, he's not the first steam engine on Sodor, ever. Perhaps in this timeline he is, but I don't know. It just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't sit right with me. Definitely not part of my canon. Personally, like I said, he was one of the first, but not the first. So yeah, Hiro is awesome, and we'll talk more and more about him as the film goes on. Anyway, yeah, this bit is very well animated and unique, and I like it a lot. Just wish that backstory detail was adjusted, but as time went on, he began to wear out, and Sodor had none of the parts needed to fix him at the time, so he was eventually left abandoned and forgotten. Needless to say, his treatment was awful, and this is so sad. He deserved so much better. He's the second lost engine of Sodor, after Duke. If only they interacted. That would have been really cool. He's made a new friend in Thomas, who wants to help, who at first says he'll go find Topham and ask him for help, to which Hiro begs him not to, fearing he will be scrapped. Obviously we know that's BS. Perhaps maybe he never knew Topham, and since he worked on a different branch line, which was likely a whole separate railway at the time, he had a different manager, who was maybe cruel, which is why he didn't repair Hiro. Thus why Hiro is afraid to get Thomas to speak with his owner. I also like that Hiro convinced Thomas that he couldn't tell Topham, and that although Thomas trusts Topham, he respects Hiro's fear and decides not to tell, and even becomes paranoid himself. Nice! That's an interesting arc to have. Instead, Thomas promptly promises to restore him to his former glory on his own, of which Hiro is eternally grateful. This is the beginning of one of the most beautiful friendships in the show, if you ask me, and I love it a lot. So yeah, solid scene, just some problems, but so heartwarming to see Thomas step up to the plate, and the love and kindness in his heart are on full display. Just shows how mature he is. Thomas can be a cheeky jerk, but he respects and loves Hiro, and I love that so much. Thomas has always respected his elders, so it makes sense why he'd want to help Hiro. Thomas may be more mature than he used to be, but can still be cheeky and rude, but never to Hiro, and I like that a lot. We return with Thomas to the steamworks, where we meet the designated works engine, Victor. After so many years of just hearing about the works, it's satisfying to finally see it for ourselves. It's big, grand, super detailed, and expansive, and just awesome. And Victor is an awesome character too, definitely top tier. Man, this movie gave us 2 banger-ass characters, woo! Now where the hell did that go in the next 2 movies, huh? But we'll talk about that later. Kevin's nothing special and kind of annoying, but he's okay in this movie, and kind of endearing in the Brenner era. Victor was super likable, charming, firm, and funny in this movie, but he becomes even better in Blue Mountain Mystery. But again, for the 20th time, we'll get to that later. So yeah, love Hiro, love Victor. Anyway, Thomas is being repaired, and Victor talks to Thomas about the contest, condemning his actions, and asks him not to engage in such stupid things and ignore Spencer. Victor is like the cool uncle that everyone in the family goes to get their car fixed and gives advice, except in this case they're locomotives, and has a quirky, clumsy, but kind nephew called Kevin. I like that analogy. But all that's on Thomas's mind is Hero, who he's more than eager to help and desperate to cover up his excitement about. Thomas wants to tell Victor, who he seems to be close with, but fears someone else will hear, so he doesn't risk it. Spencer arrives to gloat, but Thomas takes Victor's advice, shrugs him off, and congratulates him on winning. And Victor tells him to fuck off, and it's great. Spencer is appalled and slithers away. Victor finishes up with Thomas and sends him on his way. But before he leaves, Thomas sees an old engine part and wonders if he could use it for Hero, but leaves it for now. Thomas returns to the steamworks and questions Victor about the old part, which Victor gives to him, suspicious. On his way back to Hero's hideout, he's almost caught by Spencer, but manages to hide just in time, only to discover that the Duke's summer house is right next to Hero's hiding spot. Much to his horror, he realizes that he must be extra careful moving forward, as this raises the stakes drastically. This only further affirms that Spencer is the main villain, as Thomas is already hiding from him and desperate to hide Hero from him especially. Thomas gleefully takes the part to Hero, who's filled with gratitude. This just continues building on their friendship subtly. Nothing special. Thomas then returns to Tidmouth and almost tells his friends about Hero, but is stopped when Topham arrives. He tells the engines their jobs and scolds Thomas about his competition with Spencer, indicating it obviously wasn't okay with him. Good, just wish someone else like Edward questioned that, and declares he needs really useful engines, not really broken ones, playing on Thomas's fear of Topham possibly scrapping Hero, but of course we all know it's in Thomas's mind. Topham would never, ever scrap an engine, but Hero's paranoia unintentionally got to Thomas, and now he fears the worst. That's a cute little arc. Thomas thought he knew Topham, but Hero questioned it, and because he's wise, Thomas began questioning it too. Just wish that was expanded on, but I like that it's a subtle arc, as after this, Thomas mostly never questions Topham like this again, except in Soder's Legend of the Lost Treasure. Topham is intimidating here with a deep voice and stoic manner. Huge contrast with the Brenner era, huh? Anyway, yeah. Guess Thomas wasn't as afraid of telling his friends since he almost did but couldn't because of Topham. And then because of Topham's words, becomes too paranoid to even tell them. Huh. Good detail. Guess this movie really is about having faith and trust in family too. And not letting insecurity stop that. Hero, of course, never ruined that or anything, but Thomas did question it because a wide older engine did, but realizes over the course of the film to never let anyone cause him to doubt his family, his friends, and that's a great arc. Also, I like the narrator's emphasis on no broken engines. Thomas runs into Percy and after considering their close bond, confides his secret in him and tells him about Hero, and Percy, being his best friend and the kind engine he is, immediately wants to help. So Thomas tasks him with taking his train, if you can call it that, for him so that he can visit Hero, and Percy agrees but asks where he should leave his mail vans. Thomas says wherever safe, which is far too broad, so Percy decides to leave them in the nearest convenient sighting, which so happens to be right near Hero's hideout. This will come back to bite him and Thomas later. But yeah, Percy's good in this film. We follow Thomas as he heads back to the hideout only to run into Spencer, who tries questioning him. But Thomas makes up an excuse and hurries off, leaving Spencer suspicious. This continues solidifying Spencer's role as the villain and establishes his suspicions of Thomas, which will continue to develop as the film goes on. Good! Thomas returns to Hero with his new part, beginning his restoration process, or at least the one led by Thomas. Thomas's effort to restore Hero by himself is admirable, but he can only keep it going for so long without help, but it's heartwarming nonetheless. Hero admits he's doubtful he could, but Thomas assures him of his dedication and the engineers attach the new part, and it's green. What's cool about Hero's restoration is that he ends up being made up of a patchwork of different parts of varying colors, and he looks cool. Messy, but cool. We'll get to that later, but yeah, this is the beginning of our quest to restore Hero. Thomas promises to return soon, but Hero asks that he be careful as he doesn't want Thomas to get into trouble, but Thomas ignores this and reassures him once more, indicating his unending determination to help Hero no matter the cost. And then the stakes continue to present themselves as Thomas runs into Spencer, who tries interrogating him once more, and Thomas ignores him. But again, he can only hide Hero for so long. He runs into Percy, who broke down after trying to help him. This is kind of dumb since he was only pulling one truck. Spencer followed him and of course makes a dickish comment to Percy. Thomas ultimately realizes his mistake as he can't just give his jobs away without care. And it's at this point that Thomas begins to realize he can't just do it on his own, nor just with Percy. And so he makes up for it by taking him to the steamworks. However, Percy remains concerned about his mail vans being left behind, but Thomas promises to help him the next day. They arrive at a quiet steamworks, where Thomas tells Victor what happened, but Victor questions why Thomas didn't do the job himself. Thomas ultimately comes to the conclusion that if he wants to keep helping Hero, he has to tell Victor, so that he can help find the necessary parts to restore him. I love that Thomas confides in Victor, as it indicates how much he truly trusts him. It only strengthens Victor as a character and causes us, the audience, to trust and like him even more. Victor immediately jumps to affirm his care and willingness to help them, indicating his dedication to his friends and engines. Just really shows how much Victor cares and how dedicated he is to his job and position, but also as a friend to the engines. He commends Thomas for trying to help an older engine and promises to help, but he also tells him to tell Topham, but Thomas expresses his concern that the hero might be scrapped, so they need to fix Hero first, and Victor understands. Thomas returns to the sheds where his friends and an angry Topham await. Topham confronts him about getting Percy to take his special and losing the mailmans, to which Thomas apologizes and promises to make up for it, and Topham strictly orders that will be the case. I like how Topham is portrayed in this film. For most of the film, he appears as the strict, firm authority figure that can often be intimidating, but in the end, as we are reminded in the climax, he cares deeply for his engines and would do anything to help them, and any engine in need, and would never scrap them. I wish that maybe they showed us his softer side in the film at some points, and he's like, "Thomas, if there's something going on, I need you to tell me, please." But Thomas isn't sure yet, as he continues to fight his paranoia. Topham leaves, and his friends immediately realize something is wrong, and jump to ask their friend what it is. Thomas thinks for a moment, and ultimately realizes that yes, he took a risk in trusting Victor and trusting Percy, but these are his best friends, his family. A family that he's known for decades, and almost 100 years, if the timeline is correct here, at least. So, of course, he can trust them. Thomas confides his secret in his friends, who all listen with wonder and immediately praise their friend and agree to help. This scene is great. I'm loving Thomas's character arc. It's a basic one, and I don't know if I'd say Thomas is more mature here or still young, but like Great Discovery, I'd say it's a mix. This is a middle-aged Thomas. Thomas is a damn idiot in the episodes here, and especially Misty Island and Day of the Diesels. But in this film and Blue Mountain Mystery, he's spot on and feels like a slightly older, more mature, but still naive, wide-eyed, and occasionally cocky Thomas. And here in this film, his trust in his friends is put into question, but he realizes to trust his family about everything. But more than that, he learns he has limits. No matter how much he wants to help defend his family or assist someone in need, he can't always do it alone, and must be willing to let those close to him, and even just regular friends, help him. Now that is an awesome arc for a more mature Thomas. I also love how Edward is the first one to ask, as he is the wisest engine, plus one of the closest to Thomas, and can always tell if something is wrong. The next day, Thomas makes up for his mistake and works his hardest, while Spencer watches him with intent, desperate to learn his secret. However, as Thomas works, his friends begin to help him restore Hero, as he observes Gordon taking apart Hero, and they exchange a smile, and later Thomas thanks him. I love that it's Gordon. Their alliance remains, and it's visible a lot in this film. He defends Thomas at the beginning, he helps Thomas with Hero, and he saves the day by racing Spencer just after the chase, which we'll talk about later. Awesome. Percy is now fixed, and Topham confronts the two about the missing mail vans, so they promise to find them. Thomas is a little discouraged after all his hard work goes unnoticed, but Victor encourages him to cheer himself and his friend up. Thomas knows instantly how to do just that. He takes Percy to meet Hero, which leaves Percy wide-eyed and full of wonder. Hero is kind and polite as always, and tells Percy how special Thomas is, and that therefore, he must be special too, leaving Percy flattered. Man, Hero is so kind, and as we'll continue to see, he's very observant. Percy asks if he has any best friends, and Hero replies he does back at home, and that he greatly misses them. This leaves Percy feeling sad, but Hero assures him that there's no reason to be, as Gordon brought him a new funnel, leaving him feeling more and more like himself and on the path to full restoration. Hero's wholesome little chuckle is the cutest thing ever and reminds me why he's one of the best CGI characters. He even brings up an observation of his, that when Gordon smiles, it changes his whole face. Now whoa, that is interesting. Only Hero would notice that, or perhaps only he and Edward would. I can imagine the two chuckling about that. I love it. Like Tug said in his Sodor's Finest, Hero notices things about our main characters we never would have noticed, and that's awesome. It just shows how observant and intelligent he is. Man, I think we could all be a bit more like Hero. Thomas and Percy return home, but on their way, Spencer hides in the shadows and declares to himself that he's going to find out what tricky Thomas is up to, reaffirming his villainous intent and how careful our friends must be. Spencer isn't like an amazing villain, and he's a bit generic at parts here, but he's a pretty great one nonetheless. Here's a good little scene. Emily is doing Thomas's work while he searches with Percy, and Spencer tries interrogating her, but she stands for none of his bullshit, and I'm all for it. I love a kind, sisterly Emily, but I also love how she can be a bit And yeah, as we see here, that shit can come in handy. And I love how she stands up to Spencer without a care in the world and even gets under his skin, leaving him stunned, showing how unafraid the engines really are of Spencer himself. They're only concerned for Hero because of how cruel Spencer can be. Thomas and Percy return to Hero, who's now almost done in his front half, covered in a gloriously messy but cool patchwork of parts, and he's eternally grateful. Don't know how they gave him that new boiler, but alright. It's awesome to see Hero begin to be restored to his former glory, albeit a bit messily. Just shows how no matter how hard the engines try, they need an expert, and this won't suffice if they want to get him fully running again. But, once more, it's an admirable effort. Hero warns them that Spencer was sneaking around the previous night and tells them to stay away for a little while. The stakes continue to rise as Spencer's gotten more and more on their trail. It's nice to see Hero in such high spirits despite this. He's the best, and comments about how well they and their friends are taking care of him. And comments how wise Edward is, and James is coming the next day, to which Percy immediately says how not wise and how bossy James is. Hearing Hero laugh loud and long at Percy's silly but typical comment was so wholesome and nice, and it makes everyone in this scene so gleeful, as Hero is not far from completion, and it's all paying off with how high-spirited he is. The next day, Thomas and Percy visit the quarry to see if the mail trucks are there. I mean, it's kind of dumb since that's on the opposite side of the island, and I'm pretty sure Percy would remember if he dropped them there, but whatever. However, they run into Spencer, who tries jumping at the opportunity to interrogate them, or beat their ass, I don't know. But Mavis jumps in to defend them, or maybe she did actually want to show him around the quarry, I don't know, and distracts him, which I love. So cool to see her like this, as she does her best to help her friends. She even causes him to miss seeing another one of Thomas's friends run by with a part. She ends up cornering Spencer under the hopper, which drops Slate all over him, disabling him for the time being as it covers his boiler and fills his funnel. Spencer finally got a comeuppance, or part of one, for being such a jackass, and it's satisfying. Thomas and Percy realize this and now know to capitalize on this opportunity, returning to Hero later. Victor begins work on Spencer, and when Thomas and Percy arrive to pick up a part, he realizes the nature of the situation. Kevin starts making noise, which causes Spencer to close his eyes, and Victor decides to use this to his advantage, so Thomas and Percy can grab a part without being seen. Nice. Victor is awesome, Kevin is useful, and this scene is kind of funny. In the next scene, Thomas and Hero have a deeper conversation. Thomas asks what Hero thinks about when he's alone, and he replies, his home, which he now misses more than ever after talking about it so much with his new friends. Thomas understands how devastating this must be, and tries encouraging Hero, assuring that Percy will bring the last part the following day, then he'll finally be ready. No more hiding, no more secrets. It'll be time for the Master of the Railway to run again, and Sir Top Hat will know all about it. This foreshadows Hero's decision to head home at the end of the film, and it's nice. Good setup. This leaves Hero in higher spirits, and he thanks Thomas, knowing how well he understands him. I love it. Thomas is now fairly emotionally intelligent. Ignore the next 2 movies and 4 seasons and it's true. The end. Screw you, Miller. Shut up. Thomas returns to the sheds only to be scolded and confronted by Topham once more, who tries asking Thomas what the hell is going on. This is the moment I was talking about earlier, where Topham could have shown some more sincerity, and instead of being completely strict here, after the last line, he could say, Thomas, I don't know what's going on with you, but I need you to talk to me. Please. And then Thomas still feels unsure. Anyway, Thomas then promises to make up for it and find the mail vans the next day, and Topham reluctantly leaves. His friends encourage him that they're almost done restoring Hero. Also, fuck Henry's line of, tomorrow, it'll be alright. Shut up, fake worrisome Henry. That's not Henry at all. But yeah, I love how the family comes together to comfort Thomas, further emphasizing how much they care and want to help their family member Thomas and new friend Hero. Sweet scene minus Henry being misportrayed as usual. As dawn breaks on a new day on Sodor, which looks really nice by the way, Spencer is fixed and sets out to continue his crusade to discover Thomas's secret. This is when his villainy is at full display, as after snooping around, he stumbles onto something near Hero's hideout. Toby and James are guarding Hero. Spencer instead, thankfully, finds Percy's mail vans, but in a moment of badassery, Toby and James chase him away from the hideout, and it's awesome and epic, well directed, played to solid music, builds great tension as the stakes are high since Spencer was so close, but ultimately only found Percy's mail van. Spencer is ultimately trapped by the two, plus Thomas, and is caught in the act of taking the vans. Nonetheless, it was a close call that could have been prevented if Percy had just delivered the mail, but thankfully, Hero wasn't discovered. Yet. So yeah, great scene as the stakes are super high, but the engines managed to chase Spencer away. However, this won't be the end of Spencer snooping. Anyway, Spencer gets confronted for having been caught with Prishy's mail vans and is suspected of some trickery and bullshit and is given strict orders to return them immediately. Nice to see him get scolded, but this won't stop him from continuing to snoop, but it'll slow him down for a little bit. Also,
I won't let Thomas get away with this.
Awesome. Spencer will have his revenge for being framed for having found the mail vans. To everyone else, he stole them, but we know he just found them. Nonetheless, he deserved this. Now, this next scene is awesome. Thomas returns to Hero to wait with him for the final part, as Hero is full of high spirits and hopes. He even wonders if Topham has seen pictures of him and knows who he is, which is definitely the truth. So cool. Only wish they realized this sooner so Thomas would have known he could tell Topham, but are rudely interrupted as they hear Spencer's whistle from nearby. Hero fears the worst, but Thomas decides to risk everything and forces Hero to try to puff away to escape despite needing the final part. This was a huge mistake on Thomas's part, as the chase that follows nearly destroys Hero. He risked everything for his friend because he wanted to protect him, and it's so tragic. Huffing his hardest, Hero barely manages to follow Thomas down the line, with the two being ecstatic as they race along, and Hero laughs loud and long as he thanks Thomas for restoring him to his former glory. But the worst case scenario occurs as Spencer slithers onto the tracks and he gets chasing after our two friends. Thomas and Hero both fear the worst and try to escape, but can only get so far as Spencer is the fastest steam engine in Britain. Right? He menacingly teases them, but our two heroes refuse to give up and puff as fast as they can. He then sees Hero and has no idea who he is, and Hero cries out, desperate to escape, and Thomas tries pushing Hero to keep going as far as he can, but unfortunately, the lack of the last part causes Hero to begin to rattle and shake. Within a matter of minutes, all of his parts begin to quickly detach and go violently flying off. Hero begs Thomas for help as the cruel Spencer continues to chase, and Thomas begs Hero to keep going. But it's all too late. Hero tried so hard. Thomas and his friends gave him hope, and now it's all being ripped away from this wonderful, sweet old engine, and it's so sad. After realizing the nature and severity of Hero's situation, Spencer sits back and watches the chaos ensue with the biggest, most devilish grin on his face, and it makes you hate him all the more. Parts continue to fly off Hero until hardly anything is left. Chase comes to an unfortunate end as Hero can no longer puff, and it's just heartbreaking. Thomas just wanted to save his friend. He's done everything he can to protect him, to help him, to save him, and to see it all come crashing down is so sad and heartbreaking. Hero doesn't deserve this. Thomas was selfish to risk it all as Hero wasn't sure. Nowadays it takes a lot to scare Hero, but back then, he was so helpless, so of course he feared Spencer. And it's so sad. Can you blame him? The fear humanizes him even further, as we already empathize with him for his backstory, but even more so knowing how vulnerable he is, and as a result, we're all of course rooting for Thomas and his friends. All the more as they try their hardest to protect their new friend, and it almost paid off as they nearly escaped. But luck wasn't on their side, and Spencer caught up with them, and he mocks and chases them until Hero can no longer puff. And after mocking and threatening the two even further, Spencer promises Thomas that Hero will be sent to the scrapyard if he has anything to say about it. The narrator even says that Hero is once more a heap of scrap, which is exactly how Spencer perceived him. And yeah, he's run down, but he isn't scrap. Of course, we all know that, but it's so sad to think about. Before things can get worse, Gordon races in like the heroic knight he is, sizes up the situation, and mocks Spencer loudly, challenging him to race to the next station, which of course, like he intended, immediately taps into Spencer's ego, as he's unable to resist the challenge, and races after our big blue hero. After the two race away, Thomas thinks on his wheels and spots a siding nearby where he'll try to hide Hero until further notice. Poor Hero has lost all hope, and we kinda have too. But Thomas refuses to give up, and his determination is so inspiring. But all his and his friends' hard work? Gone. I don't blame him for what he did, but it is kinda his fault. If only they ran the risk and waited, but I get why, because this ended up working out too, but it didn't seem like it at the time. However, Thomas doesn't give up, and that makes it all the more inspiring, and I love it a lot. It's all so awesome. I just wish the narrator would shut up, because this chase is so well directed. Music is awesome, the shots are perfect, especially the close-ups of all of Hero's parts flying off, and front shots of the trio racing along all convey the tension and severity of the chase, and the voice performances are on point, and so are all the characters, as it perfectly conveys Hero's tragedy, Spencer's cruelty and villainous nature, and Thomas's determination. It would all be perfect if it weren't for the damn narrator. I saw a cut of this scene with the narrator cut, and it's awesome. Don't know where you can find it, but it's awesome. Again, this movie would be so much better if the narrator's role was cut down. But yeah, definitely an epic, super memorable scene, and among the top 20 greatest action scenes in all of Thomas. But this all just proves that Thomas and his friends wouldn't be able to just do this alone. And it's definitely time to tell Topham, but none of them are ready to yet, as Thomas is desperate to maintain the secret. And as we see here, Gordon does his best to help protect it. Anyway, we catch up with Gordon, who manages to beat Spencer due to the latter being out of breath from the chase, and he mocks Spencer as he comes into the station, restating that he knew he'd beat him like he promised. Awesome. And then to make it even better, who could that be in his coaches? The Duke, Duchess, and Topham, who all scold him for his bullshit, and he even tries to tell them about Hero, but they shut him down, and it's awesome and so satisfying. Gordon raced in at the perfect moment and tricked him into racing so that he'd be caught. Genius. It's like they called his parents when he acted up and he's a grown-ass man. He's been harassing us because we're helping out an old man. Spencer, what the fuck? Like I said earlier, some people question Spencer's motive, but I say two things. He's trying to one-up Thomas, and he doesn't respect older engines, so he wants to scrap the engine Thomas is most passionate about that he thought he could help, which would cripple him and all his friends. Damn, Spencer's kind of evil here, huh? I wouldn't say evil, but just so cruel. He makes a damn good villain. I take it back. The Duke even claims he's not fit to work, seeing as he's clearly obsessive and delusional. Ha! But Thomas conveniently arrives and says he'll help keep Spencer in line and work with him on the summer house. Ha ha ha! Damn, that felt good. Genius! And perfectly timed. Thomas is a real sly dog, and I love it. That cheeky side we all know creeps in at just the right time, and I'm all for it. Awesome. Now here's a heartbreaking scene. Thomas returns to check on Hero, who's lost in thought, and he says one of the saddest lines in the film, and it hurts so bad, as he seems to have lost all hope, but respects and loves Thomas for trying so hard.
You did everything you could, Thomas. But I know now, I will be sent to the smelter's yard.
But Thomas refuses to give up and makes a promise, one he originally almost kept but couldn't without Topham, but now is trying to keep again, and it's so sad but inspiring that he won't give up. He promises Hero that he and his friends will look after him while he takes care of Spencer. Not all is lost, not to Thomas, but it seems now Hero has given up and admitted defeat, and it hurts, but Thomas won't, and I love it. The optimistic youngster helps out the sad old man not give up hope. Again, awesome. We return to the sheds where Thomas meets up with his friends, where they all express their sadness and regret, and Thomas says a very somber,
"We all did our best,"
as if he's almost given up hope too, and it's so gut-wrenching to hear him say it. At last, Thomas's arc begins to come full circle as he ultimately realizes that they must tell Topham, as they tried on their own, and it didn't work, and he's their last hope. He decides to improve himself again by finishing the summer house, and declares that by then, Topham will want to help him, not realizing that Topham would have helped him anyway. That's what he's here for, but he hasn't learned that yet, at least in this movie. The engines reluctantly agree. Again, maybe Edward says something like, "You can trust him, Thomas. You can tell him now." But Thomas disagrees and says he'll prove himself first, and Edward agrees. All Thomas's friends refuse to give up either, and agree instantly when Thomas asks that they continue to guard Hero, as they all want to help protect him, and it's very sweet. Edward's even the one that agrees first. I think Edward and Gordon both have very subtle roles in this film, as I bet even Sharon Miller knew how close they were with Thomas, so it makes sense for them to be two of his biggest advocates and aides. Over the next week, Thomas keeps an eye on Spencer and doesn't let him out of his sight. No bullshit and no snooping anymore. Not if Thomas has anything to say about it. Thomas is being protective and firm, and I love it. Meanwhile, Thomas's friends continue to visit Hero, as they all share stories with little details being mentioned, like that Edward exchanged wise words with him, which I love. I bet that although these two are both super wise, they can nonetheless learn from one another and become close and respect one another. God, I love that. And unfortunately mentions Henry's special coal. Damn it, what? Just say instead that he used to need special coal and had a rebuild, and Hero respected that. Why, Miller, why did you ruin Henry? Other than that, I love it. This is so nice. All these little details make me love Hero all the more, because of how kind and observant he is. Wish they showed us snippets of each conversation instead of just telling us, but then again, it saves time, I guess. At long last, the summer house is almost finished, and Thomas leaves to visit Hero while Spencer gloats. This is so cute and sweet. Hero calls Thomas his best friend. Aww. He was talking about his best friends at the beginning, and now Thomas is one of them. So sweet. This movie is so damn heartwarming, and I love it. Thomas reassures Hiro that everything will be alright and that he's going to fix it all tonight. Hiro's hope began to be restored once again, thanks to Thomas and his friends. And now Thomas is finally going to act on his promise and tell Topham. Very nice arc. And here comes the epic finale. The Duke and Duchess thank Thomas for all of his hard work, and Thomas begins to leave to talk to Topham, but Spencer catches on and threatens to get to Topham first to convince him to scrap Hiro and gives chase. In another act of inspiring determination, Thomas refuses to give in and gives it his all to outrun and beat Spencer to Knapford. Yeah, he's only a little tank engine going against an A4, but honestly, I'm okay with the lack of realism. Like I've said before, if an unrealistic segment is effective in its action and delivery and isn't too over the top, I'm okay with it. And this is kind of one of those cases, just not as effective as other instances. I like to believe that they both had to go the speed limit as their drivers wouldn't let them go faster, and Thomas got a head start. I'll just pretend since Thomas is an E2 prototype, he can go a bit faster than his siblings. Look, there's no way to justify him beating Spencer, but it's enough for me. I don't mind suspending a bit of disbelief for the moral that Little Engine can do big things, and that he beats the bully. Maybe to make it even more epic, Gordon could have come along and given Thomas a push. Thus why they're able to beat Spencer, because Gordon can go fairly fast. Yeah, I like that. But for what this scene is, I really like it. It's epic. The way it's shot, great. The music, great. The sounds of them puffing their hardest paired with the great animation, excellent. Even the narration heightens the tension a little bit, but there's still way too much of it. It's all mostly so awesome. Not like one of the top 20 action scenes in this series ever like the last one, but it's still a pretty damn great one. Thomas is finally able to beat the mighty Spencer and show how strong and fast he really is when he's determined and given the chance. And it's so badass and awesome, and I love it. It comes full circle from the beginning where he couldn't beat Spencer. But with luck and fortune and a head start on his side, he's able to just narrowly escape as they puff across an old bridge in the marshland, which gives way under Spencer's weight, causing him to come crashing down into the mud. Really nice crash, and not the last on this bridge in the series. So yeah, this scene rules. Sorry if I don't have as much to say here, just think it's a great climax, as Thomas manages to beat Spencer and Spencer receives his ultimate comeuppance. And it's so satisfying. His ego and cruel nature bit him in the ass, and following this, I think he learned an important lesson, but we'll talk about that in a bit. So great chase, great villain defeat, and great climax. Thomas even apologizes to Spencer for what happened and promises he'll get help, which is very mature of him. Thomas arrives at Knapford, tired but triumphant, and requests for Topham, who's having dinner with the Duke and Duchess, but he comes nonetheless, with the Duke and Duchess joining him. Thomas sits at the station, staring at his owner, his boss, his father-like figure, fearing the worst. But he ultimately finally takes the huge risk and tells Topham all about Hiro. Topham listens thoughtfully and kindly, as Thomas desperately tries to explain his side of the story. As Thomas anxiously awaits a response, at last, Topham asks if he said, Hiro, the master of the railway. And Thomas says yes, and the Duchess remarks that he's famous, to which Topham exclaims and asks Thomas why he'd ever thought he'd scrap the master of the railway, why he didn't just ask. Not sure what that name signifies, but I guess it's a cultural title and it's cool either way. Anyway, at long last, Thomas's fears are relieved, and his bravery to finally come clean pays off. Thomas tried his hardest, and Topham appreciates his effort, but it was time to ask for his help. Thomas has finally overcome his paranoia over the well-being of his friend, and has come to realize he never should have doubted Topham. Hiro never meant to make Thomas paranoid, but Thomas is still young, and took his fear to heart, as well as let it play on his existing respect and intimidation by Topham, and it got the better of him. But with the help of his friends and his own determination and bravery, Thomas overcame this, and it's awesome. Topham assures Thomas that he has nothing to fear and that he's not alone anymore, and that they will help Hiro at once, and it's such a satisfying relief. I love that Topham already knew about Hiro, probably not just because he's famous, which is interesting, but also because he must have been owned by his grandfather or a friend or business partner of theirs. Thomas asks about Spencer, and the Duke replies sternly that he told Spencer to stay at the summer house, but of course he ignored this, so he decides to leave Spencer on the old track until Hiro is fixed, which would probably take weeks, if not months. Damn. Kinda harsh, but Spencer honestly deserved it for what he did. Thomas returns to Hiro to ecstatically tell him the good news, and they both whoop and cheer on the other, and it's so wholesome, adorable, and satisfying. Thomas and Percy bring Hiro to the steamworks, which he eyes with wonder and joy. Topham expresses his pleasure to meet him at long last after hearing about him over the years. Hiro is gleeful and expresses his gratitude to him for both giving him a second chance at life as well as for Thomas, his really useful best friend and one of Topham's best. It's basically like an old man telling a father that he raised an amazing kid, and it's really adorable and satisfying. Victor is officially put in charge of Hiro's restoration, and Kevin drops something loudly at the worst time, but Thomas assures Hiro that he's in the best buffers. We then cut to a really satisfying, detailed, and well-made montage of Hiro's restoration, and it's just so satisfying and heartwarming. They added some nice details here. It's just so wonderful seeing Hiro restored to his former glory, which he rightfully deserves. And in a highly and effectively emotional moment, Hiro puffs out of the steelwork. God damn it! Hiro puffs out of the steamworks to reveal his new look to all of his friends. The music, the shots, the expressions of the characters, it's also perfect and conveys the beauty of Hiro as a character and engine, and the wonder of the engines, and the satisfaction of seeing Hiro at his best for the first time. It's all so wonderful. He looks magnificent. It even causes Gordon's jaw to drop. Fittingly, Thomas asks him how he feels, and Hiro replies very well, and expresses he never thought this day would come, making it all the more satisfying. Hiro's patience over the years, willingness to let Thomas help him and take a risk and let him tell all his friends and later Topham paid off. And now he's restored to his former glory once more. It's so nice that even Hiro himself had a character arc. It's a subtle one, and he doesn't change too much, but he becomes all the more hopeful and optimistic. He never became cynical, but instead afraid, and it's understandable. But now thanks to Thomas, he's gotten his groove back, and I love it. They both had a great character arc, but there's still one more main character that also had a solid character arc. Thomas and Hiro return to Spencer to help him. Spencer hopelessly says that Thomas isn't strong enough to help him, but Thomas has brought someone who can help, revealing Hiro. Thomas isn't doing this alone anymore, and this just ties back to it, and it will again in a moment. Letting other people help you can allow you to find even more people that can help too. It's all a big continuous cycle of meeting new people and making new friends and letting them in and, well, them helping you, and that's so awesome and feels like a real theme. Anyway, Spencer is shocked and asks who the engine is, and Hiro confidently tells him his name. Spencer puts two and two together and asks if he was the scrapped engine he chased after, and Hiro says he was the scrap engine, but as Spencer can see, he is no more, much to his shock. Now, while Hiro did have a subtle character arc, I guarantee learning to forgive Spencer was not part of it. I believe that he already would have forgiven Spencer at the beginning of the movie, because he's just that kind, wise, and not the type to hold grudges. It just makes Hiro all the more admirable and lovable. Ultimately, Hiro, he forgives without hesitation, and I love that. Man, I think I just love Hiro in general. Also, seeing Hiro rescue and pull Spencer out of the mud is a little poetic. Spencer and Thomas couldn't work together to get him out. He's too heavy, too far gone as an engine. But with the help of the big-hearted, noble, and wise Hiro, they can pull him back from the dark depths from which his character has fallen and pull him back out, back on the track to a second chance, to hope for the future. Thomas is kind and optimistic, of course, but he's still got a long way to go before he'll be as noble as Hiro. I know he literally can't get Spencer out on his own, but it's a nice metaphor. Hiro pulls Spencer out with ease and drags him to the steamworks, where he is quickly fixed. Spencer then reunites with Hiro and Thomas to finish the summer house, but you can tell based on his expressions that he's riddled with guilt and lost in thought. It's a nice detail. Spencer then, at long last, apologizes to both of them, and to be honest, because of his tone, the music, and his expression, especially that glimmer in his eye, it's kind of emotional and really satisfying, especially when he apologizes to Hiro and declares that he wants to be friends with him, with the both of them, to which they agree. Beautiful. Now I know, you don't always need the villain to get redemption, but I like it here. Spencer is a deeper character than just being cruel, if you ask me, and I love that that's portrayed here, and he's not just nasty all the time. If you ask me, Spencer's lonely and only wants to act important, and because he wants everyone to know he's special since, although it's unsaid in the series, he's one of the last remaining A4s, and is now a rare but greatly beloved breed of engine, and possibly feels either outcast by his siblings, who may be wiser than he is, or they're all puffed up, and therefore he is too, and has seeked attention for so long, but now desires companionship, starting with Hiro and Thomas. And it's really nice. Feels like his character has been building to redemption for a long time. And after this, while yeah, he's still very cocky and stuffed up, He never bullies the Sodor engines the same way, and only teases Gordon and sometimes Thomas, but that's because he had a deep rivalry with Gordon and will always have an awkward friendship with Thomas. But yeah, he had a really nice arc. He and his class will always be legends, but are now old, just like the Sodor engines. And now, I think he's beginning to realize that and is now going to be more respectful. That night, Thomas notices how somber Hiro is, and asks what's wrong. Hiro expresses how thankful he is for Thomas, that he's the best friend he's ever had, but that he needs to go home. And being the mature engine he is now, Thomas understands. This movie is just beautiful. Things once again come full circle, as there was a lot of build up to this throughout the film, with all the references to his home, missing his friends, and so forth, so it makes complete sense and feels right. Thomas then promises to help and puffs away to tell Topham, much to Hiro's surprise, to which Topham praises him and understands as well, and promises to help. The next day, the engines wait at Brendam with a farewell party for Hiro, and upon his arrival, whoop and whistle as loud as they can. Hiro whistles loudest and longest of all, and stops by Thomas and Percy. This gets really emotional and touches my heart incredibly. Thomas says that it's time for him to go home, and it almost looks like he's on the verge of tears. Hiro somberly agrees, indicating his slight reluctance to leave too. He tells Thomas that he will never forget what he did for him, and that he will never forget him. Thomas proposes that he could visit Hiro someday, which is something Bubba almost follows up on, but got cancelled before it could, and I think that's for the best, as when Hiro leaves in season 24, it felt right and appropriate for him to leave at last. Would be cool to think about though, and Percy proposes he come back to visit them, to which Hiro replies with an optimistic maybe. This is obviously followed up in season 13, which I think was way too soon, but I get it for marketing purposes. But I think it would have been much more appropriate if he came back to work as a goods engine between Sodor and the mainland in season 14, as he realized that Sodor was his new home, and then stays for 10 seasons. I know it was better marketing-wise to bring him back immediately, but thematically it undermines the ending of the movie, and I hate that. But I do love that he comes back because he's such a wonderful, lovable character. And this series only builds upon his depth in Henry's Hero, No More Mr. Nice Engine, and Helping Hiro, and I love that. But you know what else I love? This ending. Thomas reminds Hiro that Sodor will always be his home. Hiro knows this, and thanks Thomas one more time, and whistles once more as he rides off to his boat, ready to begin his journey home at last. It's beautiful, it's poetic, it's emotional, and it's just so right. It feels right for our new friend to go home, and he deserves it. Who knows? Maybe some of his old friends are still around and preserved. We'll never know, but I like to be optimistic. But yeah, the music, the theme that was also used when he came out of the steam, which is a nice reusage, it works and isn't lazy. The performances, the expressions on the engine's faces, everything. It all just works, and I got the chills throughout the whole scene. It's just so wonderful. Perfect! Yes, it's sad that we must bid our newest friend farewell, and may never see him again. But it's also beautiful because of how much we helped him and how happy he will be. Thomas and his friends in Topham did all they could, and Hiro's finally restored to his former glory, and now it's time for him to truly go home. But he'll always have a home on Sodor, a home that loves him, and while our new friend may live far away, he will always be with us. He loves us, and we love him, and that's what matters. But what matters even more is that we, like Thomas and his friends, all have a home of our own, with beautiful, amazing people, and engines in this case, that we care for, and love, and hold dear. And if we can be a little more like Thomas and Hiro, they'll always be with us. And that's the beauty of it. The end. Then there's the Go Go Thomas segment, which is the first of the signature special songs made for each of the movies, and it's alright, kinda catchy. There are much better ones to come, but it does cheer on Thomas, and it's cute. Not as great as Thomas Here the Leader, but it's pretty good. Really nice ending to the film after that beautifully emotional ending. So, what did I think of the film? In short, I liked it. It's a bit flawed, but I mean, Hiro, Thomas's character arc, the story, the cast, the usage of the STEAM team, which I'd argue is even better than The Great Discovery, the voices, mostly, Spencer as a villain, the music, the solid animation, the action, Victor and Kevin, the many emotional moments throughout, especially the ending, and how it serves as the kickoff to the CGI era, which mostly sucked and was disappointing until Blue Mountain Mystery and the Brenner era, but still, it's all just pretty damn great. However, I gotta say, so much of the oversimplified dialogue, not all, but a lot of it is, and the annoying overusage of the narration are so distracting and detract from the film, and some of the story could be improved, but it was mostly solid. But for those reasons, I'm afraid to say it's not quite a masterpiece. It's pretty damn great, like an 8.5 out of 10, but not quite a 9. I'm sorry guys, I was really hoping this one would be a masterpiece, but it just isn't. A lot of it is really wonderful, and I do really like this movie, I promise I do, but this is Miller we're talking about. CGI Miller. 40% of the dialogue and the overusage of the narration kind of ruin it a good bit, but it's still really great, and if you love this movie, I completely understand, and a part of me does love it too, but I'll never love it as much as The Great Discovery or Legend of Lost Treasure. And that's okay. It served as a kickoff to CGI Thomas, and it did a pretty damn good job. Was everything that followed disappointing and kind of bad? Yeah. But did it get better? Absolutely. But that took a couple years and 2 movies, but we'll get there. More on that in the next 2 Hick Bombs. Now, how could we improve the film and make it a masterpiece? Improvements and changes. Now guys, honestly, like The Great Discovery, but even more so here, there isn't much I'd change, as about 80% of the film is great as it is. But there is that 20% that kills part of it. And like I just said, that 20% is composed of 2 things that could have been easily changed with one more rewrite. 1. Cut down the narration. One of the biggest things that irks me about this film is all the damn narration. It's just so overused and disrupts so many of the scenes and kind of almost ruins some of them by saying way too much and leaving less subtlety and openness to the audience to interpret things. Yeah, the narration in The Great Discovery could be a little obnoxious, but hey, at least most of it built upon what was happening and didn't just explain what was happening on screen, and instead gave us more and actual insight into what the characters were thinking that wasn't obvious. So yeah, cut it down and shut the Michaels up some more. Would improve the film drastically. 2. Tweak the dialogue. I've mentioned this before and I'll mention it again. Hit era and CGI Miller era dialogue sucks and is oversimplified and typically not good. It's alright in this movie, but could have been better. Don't get me wrong, sometimes simple dialogue is great. It worked well in The Great Discovery because there was more depth there, and it does kind of work here in a lot of places, but not as much. So yeah, just improve the dialogue and get someone to edit the script. And guys, that's pretty much it. Like I said, those were the main 2 things. Yeah, there's a few more minor changes like giving Edward, Gordon, and Topham more lines or changing some lines and adding Gordon to the chase, but I can live without those. If you just improve the dialogue and cut down the narration, this film would be a masterpiece. But it's not. And that's okay, because it's still pretty great. Far better than the 2 movies after this, but both of which I'm not looking forward to talking about. Well, actually, Day of the Diesels, I'm more optimistic about because there was a lot of potential and I have a lot of ideas of my own, plus a few from other people I'd like to mention. So I think it could be fun aside from all the criticism we'll have to provide about its mediocrity, but Misty Island Rescue? Hell no. I wish I could just skip it because it's a hopeless mess. But alas, I committed to making a video about each special and I intend to follow upon it. So I'll see you all in Misty Island Rescue or the next video. So get ready for that, folks, because it'll be a heck of a ride. Thanks again for watching, friends. Take care. Bye-bye.